For today, our work plan would be we will talk about the interesting fact. Did you know? We will read about a verse for today. We will talk about one people. Then we will reflect after our discussion. Then activity. Then wrap up. For our learning targets, I can describe the early Christian community's way of life and I can follow the early Christians' actions, especially towards unity and love. Did you know that there are many areas in the Philippines that need to be protected? Two of them are located in Palawan. To succeed in this work of preservation and protection, the participation and cooperation of local communities is important. First, the famous underground river in Palawan must be protected. Now, I believe you are familiar of the underground river in Palawan. The members of local communities are given alternative livelihood as both paddlers and tourist guides, such that they no longer engage in livelihood that destroy the mangroves in the river. Another natural wonder that must be protected is the Tobata Reefs. The members of local communities were encouraged to give up their fishing rights in the abundant coral atolls, and in exchange, they will receive 7% of the park fees for their livelihood projects and social services. This is Tobata Reef. The marine and bird sanctuary consists of two huge atolls and the smaller Jesse Beasley Reef covering a total of 97,030 hectares. And then also we have the underground river and I believe you are familiar with it. This is one of the world's most impressive cave systems, featuring spectacular limestone karst landscapes, pristine natural beauty, and intact old-growth forests and distinctive wildlife. When people work together and form communities, the chances that they will be successful in their project increase. Now, these are just two examples of projects that succeeded because two communities or the communities work together. Now let's read the verse for the day. The early Christians devoted themselves to the teachings of the apostles and to the communal life, to the breaking of the bread, and to the prayers. They would sell their property and possessions and share among all according to each one's need. Every day, they devoted themselves to meeting together in the temple area with exultation and sincerity of heart, praising God and enjoying favor with all the people. And every day the Lord added to their number those who were being saved. That's from Acts chapter 2, verse 42 to 47. Unity or harmony is a characteristic of God's creations. When God created the world and the human persons, He put order and harmony on all that He created. There was unity between the man and the woman and between them and God. But this unity was destroyed when sin entered the world. God was hurt by the disobedience of the man and the woman, but He still showed them mercy when He promised to send a Savior who will save humankind from sin. God began His work of reuniting humankind with one another and with Himself when He called up Abraham and promised him that he will be the father of all nations. His promise saw initial fulfillment when He formed Israel to be His people. He united with them with covenant and united them under one king, David. But this unity was again destroyed by sin. God's people were not faithful to Him and to the covenant He established with them. As a result, they were divided, but God once again showed mercy and promised them through the prophets that He will establish a new covenant with them, a covenant of love that His Son Jesus will fulfill. The covenant of love established by Jesus requires the new people of God, the church, to manifest two loves. the love of God and the love of neighbor. These two loves cannot be separated. Jesus emphasized that not all who call God Father will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only those who do the Father's will. In short, we cannot say we love God and completely ignore our neighbors in need. Now let's have some reflection. Now, what was the primary cause that destroys unity? The answer of that is the primary cause that destroys unity is sin and is conquered only in the unifying love of God through His Son Jesus. Next, how does the early Christians live their life? The love for God and neighbor that the covenant of love requires is lived very well by the communities of early Christians. They are joyful. The way the early Christians lived their life is described in the Acts of the Apostles. From this description, we can see that the early Christians were devoted to the teachings of the apostles. The apostles gave personal testimonies of their life with Jesus. They told them stories of His love for the sick, the poor, and the rejected. These stories made them love Jesus more, and it made them more loving towards their neighbors. The Acts of the Apostles also describe the early Christians as devoted to the communal life and to the prayer. They shared everything in common. They sold their properties, and the money they got were given to the apostles for them to buy the needs of the community. Each member was provided according to his or her need. That is why it is not surprising that there was no needy person in their community. Love is the driving force that made them share all things in common. The early Christians were also described as devoted to the breaking of the bread. The breaking of bread refers to the Eucharist. The early Christians hunger for Jesus, and this hunger is satisfied in the Eucharist. During the breaking of the bread, the early Christians recalled Jesus' Last Supper and the great sacrifice He went through out of love for God's people. Finally, the early Christians were devoted to prayer. They went to the temple every day to pray. Praying was a very important part of the life of the early Christians, and there was no way for them to skip it. The devotion of the early Christians to the teaching of the apostles, to the communal life, to the breaking of the bread, and to the prayer present to us, the church, a model which we must follow. Early Christians help one another as brothers and sisters. Their love for one another is a witness to the love of God. In community, a Christian grows in faith. We are called as individuals, and each one must give a personal response. But Christ calls us to form a Christian community. He wants the church to be a communion of love, life, and truth, a community of faith, hope, and charity. The first disciples expressed this in their own lives. They formed a community in which they devoted themselves to the teaching of the apostles and to the communal life, to the breaking of the bread, and to the prayer. They were one heart and mind and shared even the things they owned so that no one among them was in want.